Welcome to the Cutting Edge with Dr. Lee Pierson and Dr. Robert Stubblefield, who will be late today if he shows up. And I'm Steve Richins, and we have a special guest on today, Ed Thompson, who is an entrepreneurial activist, and he is a big contributor to the Ayn Rand Institute and a big help for a big job that the title of our show indicates. It's educating education by making it conceptual. And as every objectivist knows, this is a dire predicate for our culture. So I will turn it over to Lee for the next stage.
Yes, as you say, as every objectivist knows and is known for a long time. But Ed is really the first guy. Well, that's not quite right. I'll come back to that. But he's very nearly the first guy to actually come around and do something about it. He actually, is an activist and is doing, good work. And it wasn't his original field. He can correct me if I'm wrong. His original field was in developing, inventing new cameras. And he was quite successful in that. That's a whole different thing. As far as I know, he has never actually been in education himself, but he recognized that as a crucial area for, preventing the fall of civilization. It is nothing more crucial in education. And he started out with a narrower approach with reading. And he recognized the importance of getting reading right, and that was not being done in schools. But he has since broadened out. Partly, I guess he's been influenced by Dr. Peikoff's work in conceptual education. For example, this book, Teaching Johnny to Think, which I will return to a little later. So he was, the original educational activist in the modern times. Now, there was some activism before Ed, I think it's before Ed, that I was slightly involved in. There was something called the American Renaissance School. It was a school in Westchester, New York, that adopted a conceptual education program and was pretty good. I was just an adjunct, really. I taught thinking skills and an occasional math. I think I taught trigonometry or something, and maybe history even. But anyway, it was I was in an adjunct. I wasn't really a full-time role there, but I had an adjunct role. This was Ron Pizzaturo and Glenn Marcus, and it was quite an enterprise, but it was really a little too early, I guess. The world wasn't ready for it, and without going into it, there were problems. So that has not, it doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, Ed is quite busy at work, and he has a lot to say. So I'm going to turn over to him to do a general discussion, and then we'll start talking about, raise some of the questions that I have. Now, he and I think on this topic agree pretty much across the board, but maybe there are a few little wrinkles here and there that we can make some further progress on. So without further ado, how about I turn it over to you, Ed, and go ahead.
Thank you, Lee. It's a pleasure to be with you and to
pleasure to have you
do this. But one correction already.
Uh-oh.
The school with Ron and the other fellow, I forget who. That's a school. But that's not activism. I was actually an investor in that school, so I'll claim the title of number one activist.
Okay.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I feel better now. Thank you. Okay. So here is how I see it. I view America as being in a downward spiral intellectually. And it's accelerating. We can see this all around us. There's the CRT, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, wokeism, riots, and in the face of riots, defund the police. And there's a whole litany, and most of you know most of them. There's no point in reciting everything. If there was a key turning point in the acceleration, I view it as the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. was it 8 years ago or so, Bernie Sanders came on the field, came in sight as an avowed socialist and got within a hair's breadth of the nomination for the presidency of the United States. Now, that's pretty low. That many Americans, even though it's the ones on the left, could vote for him. So a nation's long-term direction is set not politically, but by the ideas and ideals that dominate its culture. This dominance depends on the nation's educational system, which is supposed to train young minds and impart fundamental ideas and convictions. But if education fails in this task, the culture degrades, and this is what I was just saying. Succeeding generations are less able to think and to deal with abstract requirements of life and more willing to follow authority, which is, again, exactly what we're seeing. Such a nation will not remain free for long. Now, think about that. What we're talking about here is survival as a nation, ultimately. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to crash in 10 years or 20 years, but we're going down the tube. So let me leave it at that. So obviously our educational system is failing at its task. You see the progressive education needs the educational philosophies begun by John Dewey and picked up by others is churning out millions per year of emotional, conflicted, ill-educated dropouts by the millions. And we need to eliminate that. We need to replace it with a proper form of education, which is what we call conceptual education, or to coin a term, classical education. Now, the teacher colleges are corrupt from top to bottom, and they can't be reformed. I will assert that the teacher colleges cannot be reformed, not at this stage. There needs to be another way of doing it. So the education is the one in the many. I use that term because in any endeavor in life, education is at the root. So in order to save the world, first we need to save the children. No meaningful movement toward free markets can be accomplished without radically reforming our educational system. So the proper form of education then is to teach a child how to think. Now, COVID has a silver lining. Parents have gotten a look into what I call the black box called schools, right? Most people have had school choice, most parents, since the beginning of time. They move to a location that has a so-called good school or a school district. How do they know? Their real estate agent tells them so. But most people never knew what goes on inside of schools, and they didn't know how progressively, to use the term, bad it was getting with critical race theory and all the other evil things that are being taught, the indoctrination. So I like to say, to coin a phrase or to use somebody else's, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we need a plan. We can't reform education from the top down. I, as are most objectivists, am an abolitionist. Public school systems should be eliminated. They should be gotten rid of. Now, it's easy to say, but it's not going to happen. We need to face that. So we need to attack it. The teachers' college is being corrupt, progressive, can't be changed. All teachers, virtually all teachers, even in private schools, are certified by the state. And the only way they can be certified by the state is to go through the system. So most teachers are tainted. Now, I'm sure there are good teachers out there, no doubt that there are, but many good teachers leave the system because they have to follow the doctrinaire the pedagogy that comes down from on high and so forth. So we have that to fight. I started out on my campaign, well, let me backtrack. I'm so serious about this that I founded the Conceptual Education Fellowship at the Ayn Rand Institute. The first fellow is Sam Weaver. I live in Florida, he lives in Florida, but that's just a coincidence. So that's ongoing, and that's internal. And I am not internal. I'm an activist. I'm working on the outside. So Sam is doing his thing with ARI and the intellectuals there. He's doing training at Higher Ground, which is a chain of Montessori schools that was started about 5 years ago and making lots of headway. So what to do? And here's my answer. Well, first, one other thing. The silver lining. Parents now have gotten a view into the black box and they are rebelling. They're going to school board meetings. They're starting groups. There are a number of groups. A lot of them are pretty good. And they've gone nationwide. There's one in Florida that went nationwide in a matter of months. And I'm a member. But they're against most of them. They're against CRT. They're against pornography in K through 12 and emphasis on K, right? I don't know, most of you know it, but I mean, some of the stuff would curl my toes to read. It's so bad, and they're teaching it to young kids. We have a new law in Florida that was just passed by Governor DeSantis, and it eliminates teaching this bad stuff to K through 3. I don't know why they stopped at 3rd grade, but anyway. So what I'm about at this point, school boards. The way to change the system, and I think Lee might disagree with me, but let's agree that it's as a stopgap measure, because that's all we can do at this point until better things come along. I'm involved here in Naples, Florida, or Collier County, on trying to elect 3 new school board members this term. I know all of them. I'm helping actually one of them, and we're going to debates and stuff like that and trying to get them elected. And the idea is that a school board, if I can parallel it with corporate boards, right? A corporate board hires the CEO. The school system, that would be the superintendent. And they set policy, and the CEO or the superintendent is supposed to follow the policy. And they're supposed to demand results. The other side of that is that the CEO reports to the shareholders if it's a corporation. The school districts, they report to the taxpayers, the people who pay the bill, and of course, namely to parents. So the idea is to return to classical education, to get the school board locally to hire a superintendent, and here in town, or in the county, I should say, the superintendent is retiring next year, so it's a grand opening. Hire a superintendent who can do what it is that we want to do, and that is institute classical education. And by that, I use the term loosely. I mean reading, writing, arithmetic, particularly, STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and so forth. And to cut out all the bad stuff. Just eliminate all the books in the library that need to be eliminated and cull out the bad apples. Don't forget, all of these teachers go through the system. So remember when the USSR fell, what I would say at that time is communism is dead. Long live the communists. In other words, the communists were still there. The country collapsed, but or the affiliation collapsed. But so we have teachers that are bad apples, and we need to cull them out. And we ought to be able to hire from the outside, hire scientists to teach science or math and so forth. So that's the plan. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that sounds good. I think I would say maybe even necessary. My question that comes to mind immediately is it sufficient? Is it enough? So if, for example, we bring back what you call classical education, well, I guess you're using the term, as you said, loosely. So maybe that covers a lot more ground than I'm thinking. But if it's just a matter of education, factual, giving the facts, which classical education, a la E.D. Hirsch and others are good at, that's good. I think it's certainly it's better than not teaching facts, but it's not sufficient. If you want conceptual education, the students need to be able not just have the facts, but be able to conceptually organize the facts in a centralized structure, with hierarchy and such. And that is itself a skill that has to be developed. And I'm not sure the classical education people know how to develop that skill. I'm not sure they do. So we need something there.
I'm sure that they don't. As are you. I said we are both sure that they don't have the skill.
Yeah. So what do we do there? Well, I think I might as well throw in my 2 cents worth into the pod here right now. I'll get it out over with so we can go on to other things maybe. That some amount of what we might call psychoepistemological training, I think is absolutely essential to a conceptual education, because the conceptual level of functioning, and this is just standard objectivism ideas, is subject to error. You can make mistakes, and students can make mistakes. And I think the only way to correct mistakes in thinking, the only way to consistently, to volitionally, intentionally, on a consistent basis, other than just by accident, to consistently correct mistakes, you have to be able to introspect on what's going on in your mind while you are thinking, introspect on the thought process to identify where there are gaps in your thinking and problems that need solving. And that is a skill. And that is, in my opinion, that is the most important cognitive skill that is not, how should I put this, is not taught. It's taught, but it's not taught explicitly. It's not explicitly taught by anybody. I mean, that includes Montessori or anywhere else I know. I don't know anybody. I mean, there are good teachers that will model their thought processes, and that's good teaching if they do that when they're teaching their math class or their science or history, whatever. But as an explicit and organized process, I don't think anybody, as far as I know, nobody does that. And I think it's actually essential to a proper conceptual education. Let me just read a little bit, if I may, from Dr. Peikoff, Teaching Johnny How to Think, that's relevant to this issue. And then a comment, I'll do this, this will be brief, but this is chapter 2 on page 15, if anybody wants to check me in, Teaching Johnny to Think. And Dr. Peikoff says, extrospection must precede introspection, whether in an individual or in the whole history of the human race. First, you have to gather information. Then, at a certain level of sophisticated development, it's an interesting phrase, you can analyze what your consciousness is doing with this content. You can abstract the method you are using and, if necessary, improve it. The earliest stage to give a formal course in method is late high school years. At that point, it would merge into a course on epistemology. I do not rule out giving some tips, some logical fallacies to watch for, and so on in the earlier years, but lecturing on thinking skills should never be the primary method. Now, I think this is right, but I would elaborate on it a little bit, because I wouldn't do it by lecturing. I would have a training with exercises all the time in these things, and I wouldn't do it separately exactly. I would try to integrate it into the math curriculum and into the science curriculum, into the history, anything, because these skills apply to problem solving, to argument analysis, and to reading comprehension, among other things, pretty much. And the idea extrospection must precede introspection, that's true as a principle, but I think that spiraling is important here. You do a certain amount of extrospection, then you can start doing some introspection, and then you can do more extrospection, and then you can do, you get a spiral going, and that can start rather early. There's some research I like to cite from it's old developmental psychology research from back when they used to actually do introspection. Let the research subjects tell you what's going on in their minds. There was a study of what children know about their own memories and memory processes. And without going into detail here, the basic finding was that by about 8 years old, kids know a lot of the things that cognitive psychologists know by years of research. They know things like, you remember things that you in a list of words, for example, you remember the earlier words better and the later words better than the middle ones, for example. They know that rehearsal works, saying something over and over again. They know that what's called clustering, which is putting things, basically analyzing it conceptually, they know that helps. They know a lot of those stuff at age 8. So there is reason to believe that kids have some introspective abilities at that age, and maybe earlier than that, but certainly by that time. And I'm convinced from my own experience that those things can be trained and should be trained and must be trained. I don't think there's any alternative. And for my own experience, because most of what I know about introspection, I know by introspection. From my own experience, the understanding that I am able to examine my own thought process and make improvements and tweak it and find mistakes and fix them, that gives me a tremendous confidence in my ability to make progress on otherwise intractable seeming tasks. And it makes me confident in my ability as an independent thinker. And that's a crucial thing for students to learn, that they can make progress themselves on an independent basis. And I must say that has political implications. You don't have to go in and tell people, propagandize them that they need to live in a free society. I think that doesn't work. I think propagandizing at the political level is, let's say, ineffective. Let's put it that way. But if you get somebody to understand that they are in charge of their own minds, that they can become independent thinkers, they're going to work out for themselves the importance or the value of being in a free society, or at least they're more likely to go in that direction. So I think that's crucially important for the goals of becoming a conceptual being, but also the broader goals of wanting to get people to want to live and do what needs to be done to live in a free society. I could say a lot more. I think I'll stop there for the moment, see if either Ed or Bob want to jump in, or Steve.
Well, that's pretty deep in the weeds. And of course, I agree with every word, okay, that's what ought to be done. So if you think that's what ought to be done, then you ought to do it, right? You need to be an activist. You can't just talk about it, okay? And there's no market for it except maybe at higher ground. So if you want to talk to them about it, you would have an outlet. But there's no other outlet in the world, no market for what it is that you're saying right now. What we need to do is change the system so it becomes receptive to proper forms of proper pedagogy. So, I did start by saying that instituting classical education, again, using the term loosely, is a stopgap measure. It's a foot in the door. It's a way to begin to reform the system. So if you or anybody can think of a better way to do it than going after school boards and implementing it from county to county, from state, and ultimately from state to state, then boy, I'd like to hear it. But I don't know of a better way of doing it. And by the way, I'm dealing with ordinary people out there. They're not objectivists. They're, in fact, in Naples, they're all religious. I mean, they're all religious. And so I have to cope with that. We're trying to get rid of the indoctrination, but what it is that these people want to do is indoctrinate themselves, not as overtly and not, but they want to, they put in what's it called? Recreationism, for instance, and so forth. But anyway, let that go. What we need to do is get our foot in the door. And my plan is to cure Naples, Florida, or Collier County. If we do that, then we can replicate it county to county within Florida. And if we can do that, then we can do it state by state and save the world. So, yeah, it's grandiose, but this is the only way I can see to do it. Now, one other thing, I mentioned that there are a bunch of groups out there educating parents and anti-CRT and so forth, anti-wokeness, anti-Black Lives Matter. But that's not good enough. There is one organization I have not had time to research, and it's along the lines of what I'm talking about, namely school boards. So what I envision, which might already be being done, I hope it is fostering a nationwide campaign to educate and to elect school board members. So I've been educating the candidates here in Naples, Florida, all right? And they're eating it up. I mean, they really like what I'm telling them, and they get it. So when they get in, they're going to implement something that's good. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, for instance. We need to do this nationwide, and there's an organization that might be doing this, and stay tuned on that one. I'll hope to have more on it at a future date. Hello, Bob.
Hello. Brad Thompson wants to do you, several better. He wants to abolish government education totally.
I guess you missed my introduction. I didn't mention Brad, but I said we're all abolitionists, all right? And since you bring it up, everybody, all of you, should be reading Brad Thompson. And for the record, that's initial C, Bradley Thompson. If you Google that, you'll get him. He calls himself the redneck intellectual, and he's putting out a whole series of papers on the subject of the philosophy and the public schools and so forth. And you really ought to read that. Lee, you mentioned the E.D. Hirsch program, speaking about stopgap measures. We agree, the E.D. Hirsch system, which is one of several or many classical education programs out there, is not ideal. Okay, we agree that classical education, by several definitions, is not ideal. However, the E.D. Hirsch system was implemented statewide in Massachusetts. Maybe, I'm going to guess, maybe 15 years ago. Statewide, right? It became known as the Massachusetts Miracle. It brought Massachusetts from the bottom scholastically to the top in the United States. Now, I don't know if that's from 50 to number one, but pretty darn close to it. In fact, there was an article that I read just 3 or 4 weeks ago that Massachusetts now has the best high school system in the country. In other words, the highest rated scholastically, NAEP tests and all of that. So, a child that is educated by former past standards, what we call classical educating, reading, writing, and arithmetic, just to make it simple, can think. Maybe not ideally like Lee wants, and I'm all for that, but they can think. And a child that can think is inoculated against the system. And that's what we need to do, is inoculate them against the system. We need to give them a mind of their own. And at some point, Lee, I could see implementing your strategy, your ideas, but it needs to be done in the context of a whole pedagogy, a whole curriculum. So it needs to be curriculum people doing this. So, if it comes to a point, I'll tap you in to introduce you to curriculum people if I get involved in that.
Yeah, I don't actually doubt.
That's the way to get it started.
I don't doubt. I'm not saying that all you have to do is the psychoepistemological stuff. I don't say that. However, I do believe it's necessary, and that nothing else will take its place. And that if we don't do that, I in our earlier discussion talked a little. I like the Hirsch because facts are extremely important, but it's not enough by itself. I like Montessori. Montessori is good for perceptual training, and I think, by the way, it's really important for objectivists to think about that. If I may bring in a theoretical point, Ed may not want this, but I'm going to bring it in quickly. That so many objectivists think perception is just automatic, and you open your eyes and everything. Montessori is all about training the senses, training the perceptual abilities, and it completely refutes the idea that perception is an automatic. It just destroys the idea that perception is an automatic process. But there's a limit to how far you can go with that. And when you get to the conceptual level, that's where Dr. Peikoff has some things to say, that we need something else more than Montessori. I think that's true. Now, my knowledge of Montessori, I've been to many, visited Montessori schools, and I've read the books, but I have neither taught Montessori nor was I taught as a Montessori kid. So I don't know it in that intimate a way, but I think, you got to shift over to conceptual, more explicitly conceptual education. And in certain subjects, I think you have to change the method to a much more directed method. That, for example, in science, there are some people who advocate, well, you can use the discussion method to teach science, and I think that's absurd. There's so much, so much physics to learn. If you want to learn physics, you got to start early and often. You got to work on it. Plus, you have to learn a considerable amount of math at the same time, and you can't do it by sitting around and just, it's too slow, way too slow. You got to learn way too much. At some point, you reach a point where you can have a discussion course. But what you need is some old-fashioned, highly directed teaching, I think. Now I'm getting into, as Ed put it, I'm getting into the weeds here, maybe a little too much. But anyway, that's my thought on that. There are a lot of things we need that are not just,
but
on the one hand, not just, yeah,
I'm
go
not
ahead. It's okay.
on Montessori either, but let me just address that. I know a little bit about it. I've been reading stuff about it for 50 years or more.
Sure.
When
Me
I was
too.
7 years old. Anyway, Montessori went from toddler to first grade. So Montessori, as we know it today, I don't think is really Montessori. Now, I'm guessing partially on that, but basically, I think that Montessori has been developed into, particularly, let's say, at higher ground education, into something that might be called conceptual education. In other words, a better way of teaching. I don't think you'd call it classical education, but apparently it works. Because I can remember 50 years ago, I can remember as a teenager, parents, people that you run into in life, friends or family and so forth, putting their children in parochial school to get a better education, and seeking out Montessori schools. And that was, when it first became aware to me, that when people were talking about it. So people have known about this for many decades.
Right.
So what else would you like to know?
Wow.
Back to the issue of abolition.
Yeah.
Are you taking stopgap as being, we got to do that now because we can't abolish now, but abolish is the actual final goal?
Abolition is a progression. So you can call me a Fabian abolitionist. How's that? Remember Fabian socialist. You do things incrementally. And abolition is happening as we speak. Okay? More people are homeschooling now more than ever before. And the impetus behind that, of course, was COVID with the shutdowns and all. But they're still doing it. They're not stopping. And more people are picking it up. Then there are micro schools. Then there's what I like is, in a much larger vein, is charter schools. Charter schools are in almost every state. I think there may be 3 states that don't have them. We have a bunch of them here in Florida. We have 8 of them in Naples, Florida. And I know the owners of a couple of them and I've been meeting with them. And they're running rings around, scholastically running rings around the public schools. I can call them government schools, but public schools. And that's what we're electioneering on, okay? The public schools, well, getting back to the point of abolition. So it's happening, right? What we're doing is peeling off students and budget from the public schools to charter schools. And when parents take their kids out of public school and homeschool, that's also peeling them out. So the public schools are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, or at least not growing as fast as they would have, because obviously the population is growing and people move and so forth. So, but it is happening. We have 8 charter schools in Naples, and there will be 3 more, I think, next year, and more and more and more and more of them are coming. And they do a hell of a job. So it's being done. But abolition in the real sense, what we'd like to see is, pull the plug on it. Well, you can't do that. There's no way to do that. Nobody would do that. It would fail, politically.
But the arguments for it are very
If you have
strong.
some thoughts on how to do it, I'm all ears.
I think of the parallels of the abolition of slavery. And there were people who wanted to do it gradually, and there were firebrands who literally branded fires.
Well, that's Brad Thompson's method, and,
Yes.
and I'm with it.
And well, I'm thinking that that publicizing Brad Thompson and saying, well, we can't go there right now, but this is a stopgap measure, I think would help in both senses. It would make abolition more talkable about, and it would strengthen the ideas behind your stopgap measures.
Well, it's up to Brad. I mean, I can't imagine how he gets the time to write all that he writes. His latest book, what's it? I can't remember, but the American Mind, American Freedom Mind.
Morality.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just
America's Revolutionary Mind.
And there's a subtitle. It is evolutionary. It is earth-shattering. His peers are the people who are supposed to be as good as him are critiquing it, and not critiquing it, but lauding it. I mean, there's one of them. This guy can write. This guy can think. Brad Thompson, got a good name, by the way. And the series that he's coming out with now, I think it's up to number 6, should be made available in a book, maybe edited or something. Whether or not he wants to do that, I don't know. But he has a following, and he's making waves. He parallels his own task with the freedom movement back in the 1800s. And he even said that it took maybe 35 years for what's the activist name from the 1800s? I can't remember.
Oh,
About what? Slavery?
Yeah,
Garrison, I suppose you're talking
Garrison. Yeah, thank you. So he parallels himself with I don't know if he's presumptuous, calls himself a Garrison, but he parallels his effort as to that's what he's doing.
Now there's John Brown too, but he got hanged. He was hanged.
yeah,
For his-
unfortunately, deservedly so.
Yeah.
Let me interject with some super chats here from
Yes.
Bonnie Bertrand. She has no comment,
Hi,
but
Bonnie.
thank you. Thank you, Bonnie. And then we have Mary Ribbons, or I don't know how to pronounce it. It's one word. It looks like Mary Bibbins, and she gave $2. And her question is, how do we contact you to discuss education ideas? And I would open that to Ed or to Lee.
Anybody that's serious about this is welcome to contact me. I don't want to put my name out in something that's going to be out on the internet. So whoever is it, Mary can contact you. Can she? You tell her how to contact, and you can pass on my email.
Yeah, if
I'm on Facebook.
Daniel in the
Ed
back.
Thompson or Conceptual Education, and either way, you can get me on Facebook and send me a message on there. but thanks.
Okay, back to
Any other questions from the audience?
Anything else out there?
no other questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Everybody agrees. I'm very pleased.
So abolition is not on the table right now.
Well, it is on the table. It's happening. I just said that. It's happening.
No,
We-
that
we-
is
we
not
need to-
true.
We need
It's
to
not-
think that way.
No, it's not. We have to use words with their meaning.
Yeah.
Having charter schools does not mean abolishing public education. It's not. That's not what it is.
It's a step along the way.
We're not. It may be a step along the way, but it is not abolishing. Public education is there, and it's going to continue to be there, probably for a considerable amount of time. And I was actually agreeing with what you said before. Is it'd be nice to think of ways of getting into public education. I don't know how to. I don't know how to do that. I mean, marketing isn't my thing in particular. I've actually taught and I've done a little teaching in public schools, not much, and it's such a bureaucracy, and it is so designed to protect people from competition of anything good. It's very difficult. I mean, to get to do anything really, it's just hard. It's very hard. Maybe somebody knows how to do that. I'd like to know how to do that.
Well, I know
I
how
do
to
think
do it.
that
I've just been talking about it for half an hour. The way to do
I know,
it,
but has anybody done it?
change it from the inside, from the school board, and implement.
Okay,
what
but
I call-
so far that hasn't happened.
let's call it the basic fundamentals. I call it a stopgap, but the basic fundamentals, which is good enough for now. And when we're
Yeah.
doing that, then there'll be opportunity to get in a whole new pedagogy. Somebody who's coming up with a curriculum, whether it's a higher ground or somebody else, right, and implement it. And if you're involved in the curriculum, then it'll really be great. But we need to do it in the system and work it from the bottom up. And the parent will help us with that. A lot of people out there that want good education. I mean, every parent wants a good education for their kid. They don't know what a good education is. We need to tell them what it is. We need to demonstrate it.
Okay, that sounds good to me. You mentioned the teacher colleges, and here's where I can again. I've said this on other forums, but I maybe briefly I can say it again. I used to years past do seminars for teachers on how to pass their qualification exams, particularly for the elementary school ones, where they have to pass an exam that covers math, science, I guess they call it social studies, and sort of English that involved various things, including some grammar. So they had some substantive knowledge. And what I found is not surprising. The teachers that came to this, where I think were fairly representative, but maybe it was a special selected group. I don't know. But anyway, they came. They were enthusiastic. They were nice people. They were interested in education. They really wanted to help the students. They were interested. They would like to do it right. They were open-minded. Maybe I should use the more exact objectivist phrase. They were active-minded, or they were trying to be, but they didn't know anything. They were that's overstated. They were somewhat bereft of knowledge. So if I asked them, one of my favorite questions was, where are the electrons in the atom? Are they swirling around outside, or are they in the nucleus, in the middle? And I get like 50% correct answer, which is chance, maybe a little above that. I asked them, what's the New Deal? And they thought it was a card game. No, that's a joke. But they didn't know. They didn't know what that is. Stuff like that. They just didn't have the knowledge. And I had to give them something. So I would do a ridiculous 4-hour seminar on all of science, boom, just 4 or 5 hours, and a ridiculous 4 or less hour on human history, from the beginning of history or even prehistory up to, it was ridiculous. But I was giving them something because they didn't have anything, because they graduated with a degree in education. So instead of getting a degree in math, when they were going to teach math, they got math education, and that kind of shorted their math. And they should have been studying math. They should study science. And I think I agree with Dr. Peikoff that, you know, there are things to learn about pedagogy, even sort of theoretical things, but you can learn those things, as far as I can tell, in a semester or maybe a year at most.
Or you can
And
read a book.
You can read a book, but you can take a course on it. It's not a terrible thing. But you don't want to do a whole degree in math education. You know, get a degree in math, learn some actual stuff. So we have this problem that the teachers, even though their heart's in the right place, and even their minds aren't necessarily, well, they don't know anything. They don't know enough, and it's not entirely their fault. So that would be one thing, is to do something about the teacher colleges. But what can we do what can be done about the teacher colleges?
Well, I know what to do about them. And
besides burning them down. I mean,
no, well, eventually they should.
But we can't do that. You know, you can't do that.
They should wither and die when we demonstrate to them what you were just saying, that you don't need a college per se. I mean, you would have a class on it, a course or two on education in a regular university program. Look, teachers' colleges have been the laughingstock of universities for years and years and years. You know, the old saying, if you can't teach, if you can't teach teachers, right? They have been held in low regard. So let me tell you about an article I read just recently, a few weeks ago. Apparently there is a teachers' college in Florida, of which every graduate who took the licensing exam, every single graduate who took the licensing exam failed it the first time. I suppose people take it again and again until they finally pass. So these are the people who are teaching children, the people, the ones that you talk about who have their heart in the right place. Yeah, right. But they don't have their mind in the right place because they don't have a mind. I don't mean that facetiously. I mean, they don't have a mind that's, you know, they are bereft of education, as someone once said. See, I do. No, it's a disaster out there. The colleges are corrupt from top to bottom. So let me get, you know, this whole CRT thing is steeped throughout these organizations, throughout. Not necessarily every individual, but every teacher comes in contact with it. You know, it started as Marxism, then it became CT, meaning critical thinking, which I gather was maybe had some good intent. But then it was taken over by the the progressives, the anti-intellectuals, and became critical race theory. So they see race everywhere. You know, us white guys are racist by nature. It is the whole system is racist, and so on and so forth. So the whole system, 200 and 300, whatever it is, teachers' colleges in the United States are steeped in this stuff. And you can't get out of it without being affected. And those are the people that are teaching kids today in private schools as well.
Let me say something about critical thinking, because that I know a little about.
Okay, let's do something a little more cheerful.
No, this is not going to be that cheerful. Okay. I took a course on critical thinking, or was it teaching critical thinking? I don't know, something from a world's expert at Teachers College Columbia, the temple of teachers colleges, and the temple of Dewey, John Dewey, because that's where John Dewey was for a long time. Stuff. So I took it from this guy who was an expert, famous expert, but I'm trying to remember his name. It was something, might have been Greenfield or Green. So anyway, I can't remember a whole lot about it, but the main thing I got out of it was, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this is I think was the essence of it, was don't make your mind up about anything. You know, when you have an open mind, you have you should keep what Ayn Rand called a wide open mind. Just let anything come in. Well, that's, again, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you don't make up your mind. You can't, because there's a certain inherent skepticism in the way critical thinking is taught. And that's just That's basically just wrong. Shouldn't be that way. There's something else I wanted to.
As to open-minded, so the question then is the open-minded like a sponge or like a sieve?
Yeah, well, they're not going to say it's like a sieve, but that's what it amounts to. Because
John Dewey started all this with the father of progressive education, and then his acolytes took over, and 100 years later, here's where we are. If John Dewey were alive today, he'd be rolling over in his grave.
That's that old saying. I wanted to say about the things like critical race theory and other such things. It's very common now, especially in the wake of the book by Kahneman and Tversky called Thinking. What is it called?
Thinking Fast and
Slow. Okay, so a very famous book, and it has some merit. It's not totally ridiculous by any means, but Kahneman and Tversky were determined. Kahneman's still alive, determinists. Kahneman said when he was asked, "How do you avoid bias?" and said, "I've been studying this stuff for X years, and I still make the mistakes." And ultimately, he said it comes down to institutions. In other words, bias has to be eliminated collectivistically by a social enterprise of science or education or something, by some unknown means. And of course, we know that groups have their own biases. That's been found. That's one of the valid findings of social science, that there's a phenomenon of groupthink, where people make more mistakes in groups. So it's no answer. But anyway, the whole issue of bias, I think there is a legitimate issue there. People do have biases, but since determinism is false and we have free will, you can do something about bias. But I'm circling back around. If you have introspective awareness, if you can learn the skill of introspecting your own thought processes, it is actually possible. I can't go into it today, but we'll do this another cutting edge session. You can discover unconscious or subconscious bias by introspection, because there are conscious indicators that you can latch onto of things that are going on subconsciously. So the things that they call implicit bias, I think there are such things, but they can be dealt with if you learn how to do it. So I can't today. We can't go into the details of that, but sometime one of the sessions we will.
So what are the biggest objections that you're getting, Ed? If that's even if not too.
Just from Lee and Bob, that's all.
Well, we haven't really.
I am no. We were having discussions. Neither are disagreeing with me. I have had no objections. Okay, candidates want help, and I'm helping, so they love me for that. And anything and I've fed a lot of Brad Thompson's articles to a number of them, and they're receptive to that and to other material that I send them. I've had a very, shall I say, not almost instantaneous acceptance by the crowd here in town. For the record, I just moved to Florida a year ago, and it took me a while to do some other things, but I got myself established at the various Republican clubs, and the women's Republican clubs are better so far. And they're big organizations, so I know the presidents and the powers that be and so forth. And and I'm getting a very broad acceptance with no resistance whatsoever. I mean, we talk about how to do the election and whatnot, and they have better ideas than I have on that, because they're
in a certain subpopulation, right? You're not talking about it broadly across the board.
No, I'm talking about the movers and
subpopulation of, let us say, I don't know, people who are already predisposed to, people who are complaining about CRT and other things, which isn't everybody.
Well, everybody's.
And I don't know how much, by the way, I don't know myself how much critical race theory is a big deal at the elementary school level. I don't know.
It's a big deal. Why do you think I mentioned in my opening the new law that's been passed in Florida that eliminates supposedly the law. It is now a law that you can't teach critical race theory and other things of that ilk, and sex and LGBTQ, whatever it is, to students from kindergarten to third grade.
Now, do you agree with the law?
With that, and it should go to 12th grade, but at least we have K through 3.
All right. Well, on forgetting the sex stuff, I don't want to get into the sex stuff, but I want to ask you a direct question about things like critical race theory or that sort of thing. Do you think there should be a law against teaching that sort of stuff? We should have a. Because it bothers me a little bit. Obviously, I'm a little bit worried about the issue of the state deciding what can or should. And of course, I assume you would say this much. If we had a private system, let me just finish this one thing. If we had a private system, there would be no laws about that whatsoever. There'd be no laws about what you can or cannot do.
There ought to be a law because it amounts to child abuse. It is a form of child abuse. The cripple.
Not if the child learns how to think. I can't agree with that. Not if a child is learning how to think. Now, maybe you can argue it should. Maybe there should be some. I don't know. A law. As soon as you say it's a law, I'm a little worried about it. But we can say at a certain age prescription. But the whole point of a free society and free speech is that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words cannot hurt you if you are an independent thinker. If you learn how to. So I'm not sure that any particular doctrine should be forbidden by law. That seems wrong because that can be used against you just as well as it can be used for you.
Well, we have public schools, and public schools are subject to law, right? In private schools, that would be a different story, and that's what you're talking about. But in public schools, since they have the monopoly or the virtual monopoly, I mean, almost 90% of children are taught in public schools. If not, there ought to be a law. Then
let me put,
and morally, if you will, there ought to be a law. I mean, let
me put the point a little more strongly. I'll put it even
advocating.
I hear this CRT stuff all the time. You're probably not going to like this. I don't think it's not that it's total nonsense. I think there is such a thing as implicit bias. There are biases that people are not teaching, not conscious.
That might be.
I know because I don't know what they teach in elementary school. I know what they're doing in the colleges because I go to conferences a lot.
And what they're teaching,
I go to a lot of conferences.
That civilization is corrupt.
And there's a lot of nonsense involved. There's a lot of nonsense, but it's not 100% nonsense. There is such a thing as implicit bias. Now, there's a solution to implicit bias. It's called rationality, but you have to also learn in order to do that right. I'm saying you have to learn how to introspect. But if you can do that, that's the solution to the problem. I don't think this we're getting. I should have gotten to this earlier. I guess this is good, meat for discussion. But I guess I'll just leave it at that. That I'm a little worried about legislating stuff, and
let's not make that an issue.
Okay,
all right. We shouldn't be teaching it whether there's a law or not. That's the point. And we can compromise. It's only 99.5% garbage.
The theory as it is presented is wrong because it's deterministic. That's the real primary.
It's wrong because it's wrong. We're not.
But it's wrong because it's deterministic. That's why it's wrong. I'm giving you the deeper reason. It's not wrong just because, like I say, it is not wrong to say that people have biases. That is true. That is a fact. But the problem is that they are deterministic in a collectivistic manner. That's the real underlying.
Yeah, it's worse than that, Lee, because their statement is that every white person has the same white bias.
Yeah, so it's wrong, regardless of why it's wrong. It's wrong.
So Lee, what would you say is the youngest age that you've observed that a child can learn introspection? If that's a question.
And there's a in some degree, to some degree, or to a full extent. If you want to say in some degree, I think again, my my teaching of I've taught young children. I've taught everybody from grade school to grad school, and everything in between, and adults. And most of my life has been with adults, not with children. So I've done a little bit. I would say that they show some awareness at least at 5. Now, how much of that can be trained at that age? I don't, and maybe earlier. My own view, I'm speaking theoretically again, so Ed's going to get after me maybe, but I think that consciousness is always got an element of self-consciousness in it. That every state of consciousness, every state is me being aware of something. I think that's what Alan Godhealth said once. It's me being aware of something. And there's some, at least at an implicit level, awareness of that from the start. It's not there. There is no, David Hume was wrong about the nature of consciousness. It's not just free-flowing consciousness without the self in it at all, at any point. So it's a question of when can you make that explicit? When can you abstract it? That's the real question. That's what introspection really is. And I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
I agree with all of that.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, Steve, exactly. It's one of those empirical questions that developmental psychology should settle, but has, to my knowledge, hasn't been really settled yet. But it would be nice to. But I see it, like I said, there is some reason to think that 8-year-olds have a lot of introspective knowledge, quite a lot. And I think 5-year-olds have some. And, it goes on from there. That's the best I can do it. I'm not sure exactly when, training could start, but you don't have to know. It's one of these things where you don't have to draw it out a sharp line. You just pick some point where you can do it. So I would pick maybe right now offhand, I'd say I'd start at around 8 and start, but maybe it could be done earlier. Well, certainly there are other psychoepistemological. Harry Binswanger has some ideas for psychoepistemological training that are little games and things that younger children could do. So, who knows how early it could start.
And you don't have to start. You don't have to determine it now because you can't. So
right. Yeah, that's right.
It would be part of a developmental progress as you were developing the theory along with the curriculum and so forth. So
that's correct.
It would all come out in a few years, not a long period of time, and be developed from there.
Correct.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that.
I think unless we got to, Bob, you want to put anything out at this point, or?
Well, I have 2 conflicting thoughts, which should best be taken up during the clubhouse.
All right, excellent.
Sign off on that.
All right, why don't we do that? Daniel likes us to do a good ending, but I'm not sure what that is. Anyway, we're all gonna go. Thank you very much, Ed, for giving us a very stimulating material to work with.
My pleasure indeed.
Thanks, Ed.
And we can continue the discussion, but for now, thanks for everybody for coming. But we can all go over to Clubhouse, or anyone can go over to Clubhouse, where it's even more of a rough house than here. So thank you very much. And Steve, you want to wrap up with anything further?
Yeah, no, that's we'll our next show is in 2 weeks or a fortnight, as they say.
We're not quite sure what the topic would be. We have some ideas, but I can't say today. So yes, we're in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
See you in Clubhouse.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye all.